Howdy, everyone. Alrighty, so let me take a moment here to once again kind of get everybody caught up on where I'm at and where I am going. So, in my last couple of videos, I had talked about the cowling hinge. Of course, this area here where I was working on the cowling hinge. And then I had gotten to the point where I made a decision that it would be best to have this top skin along with the cowling hinge permanently riveted so that I would have a nice secure structure to continue to work on the cowling. And then in order for me to put this skin on and not have to worry about crawling inside to do other work, I needed to get my engine control cables figured out and things of that nature. So I just wanted to make sure that everything that's inside this front area inside the airplane was completed before putting this skin on. And then I jumped right into making these couple of small lines here. This is one of them. And I still have not talked about my control cables, my engine control cables. I'll get to that in a second. So in the last video, I mentioned making the small restrictors. I don't have one of the actual restrictors out, but I just talked about taking a regular AN fitting and using a set screw. Sometimes they're called grub screws, to fit inside of here with a small hole drilled into it to make your own restrictor. So I had done that, and I've got this one line in, as you see here. This is my oil line here. It of course attaches to the manifold, which is also plumbed into the sensor itself. And then this line loops around and it plugs into the engine. The restrictor is on the engine. The restrictor fitting goes on the engine. The idea is if the line breaks, that restrictor will restrict the amount of fluid that's going to be pumped through it. So you'll have time to potentially shut the engine down so that you're not spraying fuel or oil all over the place. This is just temporarily in place. Nothing on it is tight. I just wanted to get it laid out. And now I need to do this other line. This is my oil line. It runs to a different location, but depending on how I run it, I might have an opportunity to attach both of them to the firewall together. If not, I'll attach this one to the firewall by itself, and I may or may not have to attach the other line depending on how I run it. The other reason why I didn't want to nail this down quite permanently, or I didn't want to attach it permanently quite yet, is because I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting to get my oil cooler installed, and these lines for the oil cooler may change now that things are getting a little bit more populated in this area. I may have to redo the oil lines. So I didn't want to attach this quite yet because I still don't know what's going to happen with the oil cooler. I still need to put in the baffles and run the spark plug wires. Those are going to come through here a little bit, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen with these flex lines. So that's kind of been put on hold as well. So since my last video, I've run as best I could, just a rough guesstimate really, using some 1/4 inch flexible tubing. I had it positioned in the cockpit. You can see I got my throttle quadrant temporarily installed. I'll get to that in a minute. But using some 1/4 inch flexible tubing, like rubber tubing, I just kind of figured out where it's going to be with relation to the quadrant and taped it to the side of the fuselage. And then I just kind of ran it around up and down and through and out where I thought it would be. And figured out how, wherever I wanted that line to end up, I would put a piece of tape around it. And then I would take the whole thing out. I'd lay it out on the floor using a tape measure. I'd measure it from the end up to the piece of tape that I put on it, and that gave me a general length, an overall length from end to end. But before I could run the tube, of course, I had to put penetrations in the firewall. So that's where I started. I kind of figured out what made the most sense for me. So with this particular engine, this is an Aero Sport Power IO 375. The way that it's configured with the prop governor and the fuel servo with its throttle and its mixture levers, I decided that I'd put a penetration here. This is my prop control penetration. It's that cable is going to come out and run over to this bracket, and then of course it's going to continue on down to the prop governor arm here. And then I figured where to put the mixture penetration, which is this one here. And this one is obviously already completed. It's installed, and this line just runs in to my mixture control here. And then next door to that, so this is my mixture here. Over on this side, I put my throttle penetration. And this line will come across, and it will connect into the throttle here. I don't recall off the top of my head where I bought these. These are steel penetrations, steel ball. This is a steel ball with stainless steel plates. And if you look at, this might be a better shot here. Steel ball with stainless steel plates, stainless steel screws. This one is just loose. And then on the back side of the firewall, this might be a little obstructed because of the lines, but you can see that's the back side. And against that, this one is loose. It's not, none of the screws are tight. It's just kind of laid in place there. And I don't recall off the top of my head where I bought them, but I bought them from some random place. It was not a Vans or Aircraft Spruce or Wix purchase. It was some other company. I'm not going to go too much in depth with the actual lines. Again, I did not go with the typical vendor for these custom-made cables. I went with just an internet search, and I found a company that makes custom cables. And I went with that because they were a lot more inexpensive. But it's just like with the aircraft manufacturing, the companies that make aircraft cables, you know, the Wix and the Aircraft Spruce and the, what's the other one that everybody goes to? I can't think of what they're called now. The name of that company that most people go to. Anyway, these were a lot cheaper. Same quality. A lot of options as far as temperature ratings, what kind of ends you want. Just as an example, this is considered a bulkhead fitting. This is a bulkhead fitting. You know, your firewall or whatever would be here, and you tighten the nuts on it, or your bracket. You know, that's one type of fitting penetration, if you will. And then on the other end, this is another type of fitting where it's just a slot, and you put like a snap ring type of a clip type of thing down in here to hold it. And you can get those made with both ends the same, one of each, like I have here, a bulkhead at one end and the clip on the other. You can also get them where they have both configurations on both ends. So you can order these with a bulkhead fitting and the clip, both on the same end. So there's different configurations. You can have different lengths of travel, you know, your travel length, different end fittings. These are 1032 threaded. You can get different fitting or a different style ends. And then the cables themselves, you can get different sizes. They call them a series. This is a series 3 cable with the 1032 threads on both sides. And this is a high temperature sleeve, which is a little bit more expensive, but that is an option. You can get your standard cables, and then you can get what I got here. These are high temperature sleeves. Now, I don't have any other cables to compare these to. I do have the Vans supplied manual trim for the elevator, and that's that cable there. And you can see that the cable sheathing is green and it's got kind of a spiral look to it. This cable, the fittings are identical for the most part. These end fittings, that whole apparatus you see there between the red tip and the green sheathing, all of that hardware in between there seems to be on par with what my other control cables have. But this green cable seems to be more flexible. So I don't know if other engine control cables are more like that. But that particular trim cable seems to be more flexible than these. These are, in my opinion, these are pretty stiff. But this Series 3 cable with this higher temperature sheathing, the bend radius is 6 inches. So it's still a fairly tight bend radius if you need it. But to me, they do seem kind of stiff. So if I go back now to the airplane, like I said, this one here, this is the cable that I've been working on the most. This is the mixture cable. So I started with it just because it was going to be probably the simplest to start with. The mixture up there and the throttle is going to be a little bit more difficult. But anyway, when I did these penetrations, of course you need access, right? So they may not be in the absolute ideal spot, but they're in a location where I could physically drill the holes. I could physically reach in either from this side or from the inside of the airplane. I could physically reach and drill the holes and get the screws in, get the brackets on and all that. So that's something to consider. I couldn't put one in certain places because either the engine mount was in the way, I couldn't get a drill where I wanted, or even coming from inside the fuselage, there were just things in the way. So these are the locations that I was able to do with everything like you see here, with all the engine and everything else installed. These are the positions that I was actually able to do. So once that was done, I bring the cable in, and then you have to start figuring out how you're going to make the connection. You know what? Let me see if I can get some better lighting in here. Hold on. Let me move this. That might be a little bit better. So again, this is my as supplied from the engine manufacturer. This is my mixture control here and its setup. And you can see how I have this cable connected. And again, these cables, another option is the swivel. And I've got the swivel on both sides. So with the cable attached, you have this swivel, it pivots here. So this end will swivel 360 degrees, and it's an 8-degree swivel. So from center line, it goes 8 degrees. So it's 8 degrees this way, 8 degrees this way, 8 degrees all the way around. So it's a 16-degree swing from one extreme to the other. So with all of that in mind, I had to make a custom bracket here. So this is a custom stainless steel bracket that I made. It attaches right to the sump with 2 bolts, just like the original setup. And then the cable comes into that with the bulkhead fitting. And that gets screwed together as you see here. Plenty of clearance, there's no interference. And it gives it a nice straight shot into this bracket. You can see that my swivel is not too extreme. It's a pretty nice straight shot. And even when you have the bracket or the arm at each extreme, there's no binding between this rod and this attachment here. You can see that there's space around it. And when I move the arm, you can see that it swings. You can see that the arm will, or the cable will swing because of the pivot, which is what you need, but it never binds. Another way to check that is throughout the entire motion of the arm, you can check that you don't want any binding on the rod end, and you don't want any binding in here. This is nice and loose. This outer tube I can actually spin. This tube here where it goes into the pivot, that way I can spin that by hand, and you can hear that it's loose. There's no binding, and you can check that all through the range of travel. This never binds. So now I was able to accomplish that by making this custom bracket, because I could set where I wanted it, in every dimension, the X, Y, and Z dimension, if you will, and the angle back here. I can adjust that to get this the way that I want it. And then I'm working on the connection on the other end, the throttle quadrant connection. I'm working on that currently. I'll get to that when I get it figured out. So I'm going to have to do the same thing with the throttle. The throttle is going to come out to this location. It's got to ultimately connect to this arm. And if you take an eyeball from here to there, this arm is not exactly in the best. It would be better if it came straight down. I may have to order a new arm, but I'm going to have to make up some kind of new custom bracket to mount everything to. That's down the road. Same thing with the potentially with the mixture or the propeller control. The propeller governor cable is going to come out of here. It's going to loop around and go through here, and then from here it's going to connect to the arm. The cable that I had originally bought for this, these are custom cables, so you cannot return them. I didn't get that cable correct. I'm trying to figure out a remedy, but I'm not there yet. There's a potential that I may have to make a custom bracket for this location as well, but again, I'm not there yet. So, okay, so that's where I am. So I'm going to come back to making the oil line just like this one here. I'm going to come back to that at some point. I'm not worried about it right now. I was doing that just as filler while I waited on my control cables to be made. Now that those are back, I want to get those done first. I want to get those control cables done first. Then I can put the skin on and continue. However, if I'm going to be drilling more holes into the firewall for things like this, I want to do that before I put this top skin on. So I want to do the control cables first. I want to have all three of those in permanently, flight ready, attached to the quadrant, installed permanently, flight ready. Make sure there's nothing else inside the plane that I need to do. And if I'm happy with that, I'll rivet the skin on with the hinge, and then I can continue with the cowling. All right. So here we are almost 19 minutes later. So as always, thanks for stopping in, and I appreciate the comments and the emails and the donations. Really appreciate it. Thank you guys very much. Thanks for your support. And I'll talk to you guys later.